Act 1. Before the world met Mac Miller. There's a version of every artist that the world never gets to know. Before success became something that had to be maintained. Because before there was Mac Miller, there was simply Malcolm James McCormick. He was born January 19th, 1992, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His father was an architect. His mother was a photographer. Together they created a home where creativity wasn't treated like a distraction from real life. It was part of it. Art wasn't something you visited. It lived in the house. Some children grow up believing creativity is impractical. Others grow up believing it's survival. Malcolm belonged to the second group. He attended Winchester Dresden School before transferring to Taylor Aldrich High School. But classrooms never seemed to capture his imagination the way music did. He wasn't even waiting to become famous. He simply loved creating, and that's an important distinction. Because the people who chose fame often stopped creating once they achieved it. They continued making art even when no one's listening. By the age of 14, Malcolm had already immersed himself in production, songwriting, and recording. Only a young man from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, making songs with his friends, uploading the music to the internet, and hoping someone somewhere might hear what he had to say. Act 2. The boy who became Mac Miller. In the late 2000s, hip hop was changing. Mixtapes weren't just promoting tools anymore. They had become careers. For the first time, a teenager with a microphone could just post on TikTok and become famous and for people to hear their music. He began releasing music under different names before ultimately settling on the one the world would come to know, Mac Miller. In 2010, Mac released Kids. The title stood for kicking incredibly dope shit, but beneath its carefree energy was something deeper. The mixtape captured a feeling: freedom, youth, summer, the belief that life was only just the beginning. Listening to Kids today feels like opening an old photo album. The production is bright. The lyrics are playful. The confidence feels effortless. Mac wasn't pretending to have figured life out. He wasn't just performing pain. He was trying to convince listeners he was the hardest rapper alive. He sounded like someone genuinely enjoying the process of becoming, and people connected with that honesty. His audience wasn't simply just listening to him, they grew alongside him. Late night drives, college dorms, the first taste of independence. He wasn't selling perfection, he was selling something a lot deeper: a connection. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as identity foreclosure, when a person's identity becomes fixed before they had the opportunity to fully discover who they really are. Imagine being 19 years old, still learning yourself, still making mistakes, still changing every day. Now imagine millions of people believing they already know exactly who you are. That's what fame can do. It freezes you in time. Fans often fall in love with the particular version of an artist. And I feel like, no matter how much I listen to somebody, it just depends on who it is, right? I think that as you evolve as a person or as an artist, like, we are not the same people as the first time we listened to you. We've changed. We've had to go through life. We've had to go through strife. You know what I'm saying? And all those emotions that originally got us there are the same emotions that we have when we grow with you, right? Sometimes we understand that the vibe came with that moment. And when the moment is up, the moment is up. And that's why I love so much when an artist is that's why I love so much when an artist develops in front of me. Because while they are figuring out, who they're gonna be, who they are, all the things that life is, we're also doing it. We're also in the thing doing the same thing. And I think that is so much value in that. It's so much value in that. Because even though we don't know the person, we know what we connected with. We know what brought us there. I love an artist that is vulnerable. Like, I love an artist that give us all of the emotions. Because believe it or not, like in different stages of our lives, sometimes when we have that to connect to, it make us feel like, damn, we're not alone. I'm going through this same thing, that they're going through. And it dropped. It dropped right when I needed it to drop. And it feeds the soul. And it feeds your spirit. And that's something that I feel like that is something for me that'll keep me listening way past the expiration date. You know how, you know, not every phase. I think that that's what people have kind of gotten like misconstrued about what music can be. I think that when an artist evolves, it's not always going to be something that we enjoy. Does that mean that that person at that time, like that time in their lives, does that mean that that person doesn't like fit your life no more? It's a lot of like within life. Let's just within life, outside of music, within life, right? There are gonna be times when you're going through phases that it don't agree with everybody. You're going through this phase, and not everybody want to see you through this phase. You're not the best version of you for them. Does that mean that you stop being the person that you were with them? You don't have to change fully. I guess it just, it's more situational. But it's about the same. We have seasons. They have seasons. That season wasn't the one that I wanted to fuck with. So let's just go to a new one. Because there was never a time where I was following an artist and I may not have liked a release that I just stopped listening to them completely. I just skipped over that project. They got 1,000 more that I can listen to. See what I'm saying? People aren't photographs. They're living things. They're supposed to evolve. Mac was evolving. The problem was the audience wasn't always ready to evolve with him. In November of 2010, he signed with Rostrongers. I don't know if I said that right. The independent label that helped launch Wiz's career. Suddenly, the dream wasn't hypothetical anymore. Tours became bigger. Cries became louder. Interviews became constant. Every success brought another expectation. Then came Blue Slide Park. Released in 2011, it debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. It was an extraordinary achievement. The first independently distributed debut album that accomplished that feat in years. By almost every measurable standard, Mac Miller had won. And let me tell you, man, it's one thing. It is absolutely one thing when you are, I think that a lot of times, I can't even say this to be true because I have no way to measure it, right? I have no way to measure it. So I can only go by, you know, I can only go by like what I imagine could be true. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right or that I'm wrong. It's just something that I just thought about, you know? When you have money and you no longer have the stresses of having to survive, you know, finding food, finding shelter, you know, making sure that everything is paid, taking care of your responsibilities. Once you're able to get to a level where you're good, then everything else outside of survival are the things that you left behind. Those things that you put on pause so that you can become who you are, those things come back. The only difference is you don't have the stress of figuring out how you're going to pay bills and survive. But everything that was wrong outside of that never changed. And it exacerbates situations a lot of times. Because on top of, you know, you are being secure financially, you can't trust anybody. You can't trust anything. You have to get into a routine to where, okay, I'm going to have to get me a lawyer and an accountant, right? And I'm going to have to make sure that I get a lawyer for my accountant just in case I get a manager. Now I got to get a lawyer so that I can keep the manager straight. The level of distress that you have to have in order to survive in the music business, it makes it so hard because now you're adding paranoia, anxiety, depression because you can't trust nobody. Because what ends up happening is, oh, you fuck around and trust somebody. You fuck around and trust somebody. And when that trust is put to the test and they don't pass it, now you fucked up. Because the person that you halfway trusted, it's the cold world we live in. Numbers don't always tell the whole story. Because alongside commercial success came something he didn't fully expect before: criticism. Others question whether he deserved the attention he was receiving. It's one of the strangest contradictions of success. The higher you climb, the louder the opinions become. For someone whose identity was still forming, those opinions carried weight. The smiling teenager everyone thought knew was going the smiling teenager everyone thought they knew was beginning to ask more difficult questions. What if happiness wasn't enough? What if success could not answer loneliness? What happens when you've achieved everything you dreamed about and you're still searching for yourself? What happens when you achieved everything you dreamed about and you're just okay? Those questions wouldn't be answered on Kids or a Blue Slide Park, but they will become the foundation for everything Malcolm created afterwards. Because the boy who introduced himself to the world as Mac Miller was slowly becoming a man determined to be understood, and understanding would come at a cost. Act 3, outgrowing the person everyone loved. Success has a strange relationship with identity. Before you're known, people ask who you are. After you're famous, they tell you. The version of you they fell in love with becomes the version they expect you to remain forever. But people aren't statues. People aren't statuses. They're supposed to change. People aren't statues. They're supposed to change. They're supposed to question themselves. They're supposed to become someone different than they were when they were 19. The problem is, Growth often feels like betrayal to the people who benefited from the old version of you. By the time Blue Slide Park released or reached, by the time Blue Slide Park reached #1, Mac Miller had accomplished what most artists spent an entire career chasing. He was successful, financially secure, selling out shows, living the dream, at least. That's how it looked from the outside. But success doesn't erase insecurity. It simply changes the question. Instead of asking, will anyone ever hear my music? You begin asking, do they actually hear me? The criticism surrounding Blue Slide Park lingered. While fans embraced the album, many critics dismissed it as shallow, immature, or lacking artistic depth. For someone whose entire identity was tied to creating, those words mattered, not because they destroyed his confidence, but because they challenged him. Mac could have doubled down. He could have continued making the same music that he had already proven commercially successful. Many artists do. When something works, the safest decision is to repeat it. But artists aren't remembered for repeating themselves. They're remembered for risking themselves. Instead of chasing another Blue Slide Park, Malcolm disappeared into the studio. The parties became quieter. The experimentation became louder. He immersed himself in jazz, soul, psychedelic rock, classic hip hop. And that's what I love so much. I love that so much. Especially jazz. Jazz, because its instruments involved in the creation of it, is just, it hits the soul at a place where it's hard. It's super hard to get around. It's hard to put another artist above an artist that has showed their musical depth and how using those instruments transform the song from being a regular song to a song with so much depth and dimension. You can't buy that. You can't recreate that. He wasn't simply making rap records anymore. He was studying music. Around this time, another name began appearing in the credits. Larry Fisherman. It wasn't just an alias. It was another side of Malcolm. One less concerned with being seen and more concerned with creating. As Larry Fisherman, he explored production with an obsessive curiosity. He wanted to understand every instrument, every texture, every emotion a sound could carry before a single lyric is spoken. Some people paint with brushes, others with cameras. Malcolm painted with frequency. He wasn't trying to make songs anymore. He was building worlds. Psychologists often describe identity as something that isn't discovered, but constructed. We become ourselves by experimenting, trying, failing, rebuilding. That process can look confusing from the outside, especially when someone you've admired begins changing. Fans who fell in love with the carefree optimism of kids suddenly found themselves listening to an artist wrestling with darker emotions. The smiles were still there, but they no longer carried the same innocence. Then came watching movies with the sound off. Released in 2013, it felt less like a sequel to his earlier work and more like a conversation with himself. The album was introspective. experimental, at times surreal, at times deeply lonely. It wasn't asking listeners to have fun. It was asking them to pay attention. For many artists, commercial success is the destination. For Malcolm, it became permission. Permission to stop trying to fit inside the expectation that had been built around him. He was no longer interested in proving he could make hits. He wanted to prove something far more difficult, that he could make honest art. Honestly, however, isn't always comfortable. The deeper Malcolm looked inward, the more complicated the picture became. The themes going inside his music weren't fictional. Isolation, depression, escapism, addiction. These weren't creative exercises. They were becoming part of his lived experience. The world often romanticizes the tortured artist. We imagine pain as a piece of brilliance, as though suffering somehow unlocks creativity. But that's one of the oldest myths we've ever told ourselves. Pain doesn't make people great. It simply gives them something they desperately wanted to escape. For Malcolm, music became both the mirror and the hiding place. The place where he could finally tell the truth, and the place where he could disappear inside it. The world applauded the artistic evolution, but very few people stopped to ask the question that mattered most. If the music was becoming darker, what did it say about the person writing it? Because while audiences celebrated the artist Mac McCormick was quietly fighting battles no chart position could measure. And those battles were only just the beginning. Act 4, Searching for Peace. There is a difference between feeling alive and feeling at peace. The two often look identical from the outside. Someone can laugh, create, travel, fall in love, stand in front of thousands of people every night, and still carry a silence that no one else can hear. Because peace isn't measured by applause. It's measured by what remains after the crowd goes home. For Malcolm McCormick, success has become familiar. He had proven himself as an artist. He had silenced many of the critics who once doubted his ability to grow. His music was becoming richer, more vulnerable, more intentional. But while his art continues evolving, so did the way he carried. One of the cruelest realities of adulthood is discovering that achievement doesn't automatically heal the parts of ourselves that were hurting before we became successful. We often imagine life as a series of finish lines. If I can just graduate, if I can just get the job, if I can just make enough money, if I can just fall in love, everything will finally make sense. Who am I? Will I ever feel whole? Mac's music during this period reflected those questions with increased honesty. In 2015, he released Good AM. The title itself hinted at awakening, not because everything was suddenly okay, but because every morning represented another opportunity to keep going. The album balanced confidence with vulnerability. There were records that celebrated survival. Others quietly acknowledged exhaustion. It felt less like someone pretending to have answers and more like someone learning to live with uncertainty. Then in 2016 came the divine feminine. To some listeners, it sounded like a love album, and in many ways it was. But beneath the romance was something much deeper. For the first time in years, Malcolm sounded hopeful. Not because life has become easier, but because love has a way of convincing us that healing might actually be possible. Around this time, his relationship with Ariana Grande became one of the most public chapters of his life. To millions of people, they looked happy, supportive, creative. Two artists who genuinely admired one another. But relationships have difficult burdens when they are lived beneath a spotlight. The public doesn't simply observe them, it participates in them. Every smile becomes a headline. Every disagreement becomes speculation. Every private struggle becomes public conversation. Psychologists often talk about the difference between intimacy and exposure. Exposure is being seen. Intimacy is being understood. Fame offers endless exposure, very little intimacy. As Malcolm's profile continued growing, so did public fascination with every aspect of his personal life. His relationships, his appearance, his health, his choices. Eventually, his struggles with substance use. Addiction is one of the most misunderstood experiences in modern society. People often ask, why didn't I just stop? More often, it begins with the desire to escape yourself, to quiet anxiety, to numb shame, to silence grief, to slow a mind that refuses to rest. For many people, substances doesn't initially feel like destruction. More often, it begins, For many people, substances don't initially feel like destruction. They feel like relief. That's what makes addiction so deceptive. It doesn't introduce itself as suffering. It introduces itself as comfort. Malcolm never hid the fact that he struggled. He spoke openly about it. Drugs in the interviews and throughout his music. Not to glorify them, but because pretending they didn't exist would have been dishonest. His transparency became one of the reasons why so many people connected with him. He wasn't trying to appear perfect. I think that is so admirable for someone to show themselves and take themselves away from a facade that would be easier to manufacture because you already got it all. You are who you're supposed to be. It's easy to just pretend like everything is fine so that you can appear to be perfect. But no one cares about perfection that much. It's too shallow. After a while, they're going to want more. They're going to want depth. See what they're asking a future. And even when they tell you that this is the depths of them, no one believes it. Just like Future. His transparency became one of the reasons so many people connected with him. He wasn't trying to appear perfect. He was trying to appear real. But honesty has limits. No matter how truthful an artist becomes, there are always battles they're fighting in silence. The audience hears the songs. They don't hear the nights when the music stops. They see photographs. They see the hours between them. They don't see the hours between them. As listeners, we often mistake vulnerability for healing. We assume that because someone can describe their pain beautifully, they've somehow overcome it. But naming a wound isn't the same thing as closing it. By the late 2010s, Malcolm was creating some of the most emotionally mature music of his career. He sounded wiser, more reflective, more accepting of life's contradictions. Many fans believed that many fans believed that he had finally found balance. In some ways, Perhaps he had. But healing is rarely a a straight line. There are good days, bad days, victories, relapses, hope, and fear. Sometimes within the same afternoon, the world watched Mac Miller become one of the most respected artists of his generation. What it couldn't see was how desperate Malcolm McCormick was still searching for something many of us spend our entire life trying to find. Not fame, not success, not validation, peace. And sometimes the people who seemed closest to finding it are the ones fighting hardest just to hold on. Act 5. Swimming towards the surface. Healing is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or dramatic transformation. More often, healing looks like waking up and deciding to try again. It looks like answering the phone, going to therapy, writing the song, making the apology, choosing tomorrow when yesterday almost convinced you not to. We celebrate recoveries because they're visible. But the hardest part of healing happens long before anyone notices. It's the decision, the quiet commitment to believe that life is still worth living, even when you're not entirely sure you believe it yet. By 2018, Malcolm McCormick had lived several different lives. He had seen the carefree kid from Kids, the chart-topping star of Blue Slide Park, the experimental artist behind watching movies with the sound out, the producer, the lover, the man wrestling with addiction, the public figure. Each version of himself had something behind. Each version of himself had left something behind. Each had taught him something. And somewhere beneath all of them, Malcolm was still trying to figure out who he really was. Then life changed again. His relationship with Ariana Grande came to an end. Like every aspect of his life, the breakup became public and almost immediate. For millions of people, it became entertainment, a headline, something to debate online. But behind every public breakup are two private people grieving something no one else fully understands. Relationships don't only end between two individuals. They also end between the futures whose individual they also end between the futures those individuals imagine together. A few months later came another painful moment. Malcolm was arrested after crashing his vehicle while driving under the influence. The footage spread quickly. The jokes followed. The criticism was immediate. Moments like these reveal something uncomfortable about our culture. We are often fascinated by people's lowest moments. We slow down to watch lives falling apart. But we rarely stay long enough to witness them trying to put themselves back together again. By many accounts, from those closest to him, Malcolm wasn't giving up. He was trying. He was reconnecting with people, working, creating, focusing on his sobriety, not perfectly, but sincerely. Recovery is almost never a straight line. There are setbacks. There are victories. No one applauds because they happen behind closed doors. And there is the exhausting work of learning how to live without the things that once made surviving feel easier. Then came swimming. Released on August 3rd, 2018, many fans consider it his masterpiece. Not because It was the biggest commercial success, not because it felt like his most honest conversation. The album wasn't asking listeners to rescue him. It wasn't begging for sympathy. It sounded like someone sitting quietly with himself, accepting that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about learning how to live with every version of yourself. The title itself felt symbolic. Swimming isn't the same as reaching a shore. It means you're still moving, still fighting, still refusing to sink. Throughout the album, Malcolm explored loneliness without surrendering to it, hope without pretending life was easy, fear without allowing fear to become the ending. Songs like Come Back to Earth didn't sound like someone chasing perfection. They sounded like someone exhausted from pretending they had to be perfect in the first place. There is a line throughout Swimming that many listeners return to again and again. Not because it predicts the future, but because it captures something deeply human. The desire to believe that even after all we've survived, there is still another chapter waiting for us. Perhaps that's why Swimming resonates so deeply. It isn't an album about drowning, it's an album about refusing to. Friends who visited Malcolm during this period often described someone who was optimistic, creative, excited. He was planning, recording, talking about what came next. That's one of the hardest truths to accept about loss. Healing and suffering can exist in the same person at the same time. Someone can be making progress and still be vulnerable. Someone can genuinely want tomorrow and still not live to see it. We often tell ourselves comforting stories after tragedy, that people somehow know when the end is near, that there are always unmistakable signs. But life is rarely that simple. Most people who loses someone unexpectedly will tell you the same thing. The conversation felt ordinary. The plans felt so real. Tomorrow felt guaranteed. For Malcolm, tomorrow included more music, more growth, another chance to become the man he was slowly discovering. No one knew that Swimming wouldn't simply become another album. It would become a farewell no one realized they were hearing. Not because Malcolm intended it that way, but because life had a painful hint, but because life has a painful habit of revealing meaning only after the moment had already passed. Sometimes we don't recognize the importance of today till it has become yesterday. Act 6, the day the music stopped. There are moments that divide our lives into two parts, before and after. You don't recognize them while you're living them. You're only understanding their significance once they've already passed. A phone call, a headline, a notification, 3 words that permanently changed how you remember someone. Did you hear? On September 7th, 2018, Malcolm McCormick died at the age of 26 from an accidental drug overdose involving fentanyl, cocaine, and alcohol. The world received the news all at once. The grief never arrives all at once. It comes in waves. First comes disbelief, that can't be right. Then denial, maybe it's a rumor. Then silence. The kind of silence that follows when reality finally settles down, when reality finally settles into the room. For millions of listeners, Mac Miller wasn't simply another rapper. He had narrated their adolescence. His music had played through first loves, road trips, graduation, heartbreaks, late night conversation, moments no one else could have ever fully understand. Losing him didn't feel like losing a celebrity. It felt like losing someone who had quietly grown up alongside you. There's something uniquely painful about artists. Most relationships with music is built through shared emotions. We don't remember where we first heard a song because of the song itself. We remember who we were, who we loved, who we missed, what we were trying to survive. Mac's music had become woven into the emotional timelines of millions of people. So when he died, part of those memories seemed to disappear with him. Almost immediately, the questions began. How could this happen? Who was responsible? Could someone have stopped it? The investigation eventually revealed that Malcolm had unknowingly received counterfeit pills containing fentanyl. Federal prosecutors later charged and convicted several people connected to the distribution of those drugs. For many people, those legal outcomes provided accountability, but they did not provide closure because accountability answers who. Grief keeps asking why. In the days followed, social media filled with tributes, artists who have collaborated with him, friends who had laughed with him, fans who have never met him. Everyone seemed to be mourning the same person from entirely different perspectives. And perhaps that saying something profound about Malcolm's life. He wasn't remembered for creating an image. He was remembered for creating connection. One of the greatest tragedies of addiction is that it often changes how people are remembered. The years of kindness become overshadowed by a single headline. The laughter is replaced by the circumstance of their death. The humanity disappears beneath the diagnosis. But reducing Malcolm McCormick to the way that he died would be the second tragedy, because addiction was something he was experiencing. It was never entirely who he was. He was a producer, a musician, a son, a friend, a student of jazz, a lover of film, a collector of sounds, and someone who spent countless nights chasing the perfect melody because he believed feelings deserved music. He was also a human being. And human beings are never defined by only their worst day. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking aspects of Malcolm's story is that he seemed to be moving toward something. Not perfection, not complete recovery, but growth. There is a tendency after loss to rewrite history, to imagine that everything was inevitably leading to the ending we already know. But life rarely unfolds neatly. The closest to Malcolm describes someone who was making plans, courting, creating, talking about the future, hoping and struggling had existed together, as they often do. His death reminded the world of something many people living with addiction already know. Recovery is not measured by whether someone struggles. It is measured by whether they keep trying. And Malcolm kept trying. That truth deserves to be remembered as just as much as anything else. When people speak about Mac Miller today, they often mention his kindness before they mention his music, the way he encouraged younger artists, the generosity he showed behind the scenes, the quiet compassion that rarely made headlines. Maybe that's because, in the end, character has a longer lifespan than fame. Awards gather dust, streamers are broken, charts are forgotten, but kindness has a way of surviving inside of people who received it. The day music stopped, millions of people thought they had reached the end of Malcolm McCormick's story. They hadn't. Because sometimes the final chapter isn't written by the person who leaves. It is written by the lives they changed while they were here.